Good to have you back. I'm your host, Nate Shear, and this is Mind Force, a podcast sponsored by the 3Ls: love, life, and learning. Today's episode lives at the intersection of performance and psychology. We're talking about positive intelligence and how our mental patterns either sabotage or strengthen us. We're exploring flow, the state where focus sharpens and time disappears. And we're unpacking how to balance tasks for maximum engagement instead of constant burnout. This conversation is about working smarter internally, not just externally. Kevin, welcome to the show. Before we dive in, let's take a moment to say hello to all that are listening.
Hi, and Nate, thanks so much for sharing me with your audience. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming out. For those of us meeting you for the first time, who are you?
Kevin Gizarra. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. Originally from Philadelphia. Went to school there, did all of my undergrad and graduate work there, and then went off and did my doctoral work in organizational leadership and management. So I've spent 30 years in corporations. The last 18 years were with Intel. I spent the last 10 of those years managing Intel's management and leadership development and Intel University. And I had a goal to retire at 50. I left the corporate world in 2007 to start up Magna Leadership Solutions with two of my colleagues and good friends from Intel to go and offer management leadership programs to companies that didn't have $10 million budgets. So that's what we've been doing for the last almost 20 years now. And in addition to that, I get to dabble around with being a professor at 6 different universities. So life stays pretty busy.
Wow, 6. Yeah, that's awesome. My master's is actually in industrial and organizational psychology, and no one else ever says that. So that's awesome to hear someone else is also going through. I hear a lot of MBAs and, business admin and whatnot. It's nice to hear some similar verbiage. Kevin, what are you focused on right now?
Well, I'm spending most of my time. We have a program called our Leading Forward Academy. It's a 6-month program we deliver all around the world. And it's really helping leaders, primarily targeted at small to mid-size organizations. It's really helping leaders or managers to become leaders. And it's a complete system. It's not a one and done type of thing. So we deliver those. And then what has kind of evolved out of that, Nate, has been that there's been a lot of requests for executive coaching. So between the Leading Forward Academy and my executive coaching, that keeps me pretty busy. And that's kind of what I'm working on.
Awesome. Is there something you see that's exactly the same and then one thing that's completely different between those $10 million companies and then the little guys?
Yeah, I'd say that the biggest difference is, and I've coached a lot of people who have come out of school and are looking for a kind of more of a entrepreneurial environment. And the one thing I would say is, big companies have a breadth of opportunities for you, so you can move around. I moved from marketing to engineering to product management to learning and development to leadership to lots and lots of different places. And I think the one thing that the big companies offer is that breadth. But if you were to talk about the leaders, I think the biggest difference is, the bigger companies have systems and programs and kind of sets of values and practices that are ingrained, that have established the culture. And many of the smaller companies, particularly startups with entrepreneurs, don't really have that. And they've really gone deep into the product, and just getting sales and the ideas out there. And they haven't really spent the time to develop a good system yet. And we try to help them with that, because the biggest challenges, which most companies don't recognize, is, a good portion of your profits are going out the door by the people that are leaving with the intellectual property, as well as all of the additional costs that it costs them to retrain them. So I think the biggest difference is big companies have really good systems, some a little more bureaucratic than others. The little companies have really good people, but haven't spent the time to focus on doing the integration of them other than just through hard work.
What's something that's exactly the same no matter where you go?
Boy, I think the thing that I found, whether it's a large company or a small company, is that everyone has this desire to really contribute and do well. There's very
Mm,
few people I've ever talked to in any size organization that have come in and say, today I'm really going to come in here and screw up or you know, slough off and not do my work. I found that most people really want to do a good job. You just have to give them the right things to hopefully incentivize them. And I'm not talking about money,
mm.
but really create that environment that's different. I think we're going to talk about that today, particularly in the flow session.
Yeah, that's powerful. I think that's important. We think of lots of money and not enough money and all these different things, but I think at our core, we're social creatures and we generally want to do a good job. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Well, I'm curious, what led you into the world of leadership psychology and performance science?
Well, I've always kind of been fascinated by that, I would say a systems thinker, and anybody that's read Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline, I was fortunate enough to get trained with Peter at MIT
Hmm.
and get certified to teach systems thinking. And I never knew what it was called until I got certified to do it back in 1996 at Intel. And what I found was that I always kind of look at things and I see patterns and so forth. So it's that ability to kind of see patterns, and what I recognize from the pattern observation is that there were lots of great teams. There were a lot of great teams doing great stuff, and then there were a lot of great teams that were doing not so great stuff. And what I noticed is it appeared to me that there was a one common thread, and the thread was the manager or the leader of the
Hmm.
organization could have the same type of people, the same experiences, almost identical, and you can have one that is thriving and incredibly creative, and you have the other ones that are just dying on the vine and people are desperate to get out. And fortunately for me, I was in one of those second groups, which I had an awesome team, and I had this terrible, terrible manager. He was the ultimate micromanager, and no matter what I did, I could not influence change with him. And this is prior to me going to Intel. And it drove me out, right? It's basically after 10 years and graduating up through the company and having a great job and so forth. Ultimately, I came home one night and just said to my wife, I can't work for this guy anymore. And she says, okay, go find another job. And fortunately, there was an ad for Intel. That's back when you used to get your jobs through ads in the newspaper, right? And
Mm,
and so he kind of drove me out, and I've always been curious to really want to understand what makes leaders different. And that drove me kind of to do my MBA. I did my undergraduate in engineering and business, so a dual degree from Drexel. And then when I was working at Intel, fortunately, Intel, I would say, is a learning company, learning organization, and they encouraged me to go back, and I did all my doctoral work while I was there, looking at, human motivation and engagement and really trying to figure out, what do managers do differently? And there's some amazing stuff that if you spend enough time and, write enough papers that you can find out what that is.
yeah, it's super cool, like inspiration. I mean, we see posters and different stuff, but there's something that's very deep and, I think it's science based, but it's almost an art in itself, and you can grow it and, craft it and things like that. But it's super cool. Like you're saying, you just find these minimal, things that people are doing and completely the same company and whatnot could go a completely different direction. It's really cool. I think it's like born into you too. Like myself, I'm a hospital administrator. And so when I see a process that's broken, it just drives me nuts. But yeah, I think it's kind of like built into us as people sometimes because some people are like, oh, it's just the way we've always done it. And they're just okay with it. I'm like, no, like if it doesn't work, like let's fix this to make it better, make things even a little bit better. If everyone did a little bit better, we'd be doing amazing things. Yeah, I think that's kind of deep rooted in us. Well, before we get too much farther, I wanted to see if you had a question for me.
I think the only question for you would be is, as a hospital administrator, what's your leadership? your biggest leadership challenge? I'll try to weave that through our kind of discussion today.
Oh, biggest leadership challenge. I think my biggest challenge right now, so I'm active duty Air Force. We're going through a restructure, even though it's been going on for many years, but we're transitioning to this new Defense Health Agency. So we have kind of a new boss, and there's this constant struggle between readiness and the delivery of healthcare. And so they're kind of at odds. And it's always been a challenge that we've had because readiness costs money. It costs money to have shelves of medicine and things ready to go. And so we've kind of applied a for-profit business model from the civilian sector and tried to lay it over the military, but we don't make money. We're net zero. We don't have any profit. We actually cost money, if anything. And so we've kind of laid a business model that doesn't quite work. And so it's been really difficult with people and their motivation because they feel like they're kind of getting burnt by two separate bosses that want two separate things: the delivery of that healthcare to all of our people, and then going out and doing readiness stuff out in the field and exercises and things like that. So it's probably kind of a complex thing, but I don't know if that makes sense. Two bosses, maybe morale.
Yeah. So if you read Senge's book, he talks about that as creative tension. It's holding two opposing concepts in balance. And, the leaders that can do that well are the ones that really shine. Where they get polarized in one direction or the other, that's where you're going to find more difficulties in the organization. So my tips would be is identify the two ends of the spectrum here that you've talked about, right? And get the individuals to figure out, what does that balance point mean? And it doesn't mean 50-50 one way or the other. It just means that you get those two in agreement so that the people underneath don't have to spend most of their time trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. So that way,
Yeah.
if I was asked to be a coach, that's kind of what I would come in from a consulting or a coaching hat, right? And it's getting those two individuals that have that control of the two variables to have ongoing regular discussions that change in real time depending on the environment. Too often I find, Nate, that many of the organizations that are building their cultures spend a lot of time offsite doing strategic planning, and they put something in place, and that's it. And they don't modify that, or they do it once a year. And, a really good strategic plan is much more of a compass than a roadmap, right? And it points you in the right direction, and you have to recognize that. And what I find is the people that are just strictly managers, that are just managing tasks, what they do is they think that the compass is the roadmap, and they won't deviate from it. And what you really need is you need both the compass and the roadmap working together to make sure that you can do that. And it's a constant, reiterative, continuous improvement project. So if you can do that, you're going to be in better shape.
Yeah, I think we do that a lot with people too. We want like one size fits all, like, oh, take care of this. And just people are vastly different and completely upbringing and experience and a long list of different. But I think that's interesting. Like, I just want to make it so I can fix this person and fix that person. It's like, that's not how it works. Well, we'll transition into your first pillar, which is positive intelligence. For someone hearing the term for the first time, what is positive intelligence?
So positive intelligence comes from, there's a book called Positive Intelligence written by a gentleman by the name of Shirzad Chamine. And what Shirzad has done is he's taken the concept of emotional intelligence. It's probably a lot of people are familiar with a lot of the work that was originally done back in the 90s by Daniel Goleman on emotional intelligence. And it's really kind of understanding, the five different elements, with regard to self-awareness and control and awareness of others and control and motivation. And what Shirzad has done, which I thought was really brilliant, and I had gotten certified to teach positive intelligence about 5 years ago, put about 200 people through it so far, is that is he's taken that foundational concept. He's added lots of other things like work that was done by Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania on positive psychology, some work around like David Rock on neuroscience, and he's kind of put this together in what I would call an operating system. And what positive intelligence, what Shahzad says, is there's really you have your sage brain and you have your saboteur brain. And in the saboteur brain, these are the things that are kind of holding you back. And each one of us has a different balance of the 10 saboteurs. There's actually 9 saboteurs, and there's this overriding saboteur, which he calls the judge, right? So, which is when you're thinking about something or looking at something, usually the judge comes in and they pull from these, what they call accomplice saboteurs. And the saboteurs are controller, hyperachiever, restless, stickler, pleaser, hypervigilant, avoider, victim, and hyper-rational. And once you understand which saboteurs are kind of holding you back, then you can turn on what he calls your sage brain. And your sage brain has what he calls 5 powers. And there's 5 powers. There's kind of the power of empathy, the power of exploring, the power of innovating, power of navigating, and the power of activating. And if you can turn on your sage brain and keep your saboteur brain's elements calm, right? We don't want to turn them off, right? It's kind of like putting your hand on a hot stove. You want your hand to be able to feel the heat, but once you know that it's hot, you don't want to keep it. You don't want to keep it there. So a lot of approaches from different psychologists and scientists is to get rid of the things that are causing the problem. And his perspective is, no, you need those kind of as the early warning system, the canary in the coal mine, or whatever you want to call it. And if you can do that, then you can turn on your sage brain rather than spending most of your time, which most of us do, and particularly when I'm working with different people, executives, when consulting or coaching them, is most of the time they're spending their time, kind of combating the saboteurs, and that's really not the intention. So, and for anybody listening, you can go and take I'll give you a link. You can put it in the show notes, or if you just go to pqtrainingandcoaching.com, there's a link there that'll walk you through how to take the assessment. Anybody listening can take the positive intelligence assessment for free, and they'll get an idea of which ones are causing the most challenge and what's the degree of strength of them. So for it's a long-winded way to talk about that, but really what it is, it's really understanding, your saboteurs or the things that are holding you back, and how to really activate kind of the creative side of your brain, because that's really where the true value lies.
That's good. Yeah, that's a good foundation. So you said that people kind of combat it and kind of get wrapped up in, that effort. So in relation to this positive intelligence, how can someone start strengthening their mental fitness in practical ways daily?
Well, if you go to the site and you take your assessment, it'll give you great ideas. It'll give you a report. It'll tell you what are how the 9 rate with each other, and particularly it'll focus on the top 3, and it'll give you all the recommendations in there. You can get it through the book. There's a 6-week class or program that we deliver in a cohort style, so people can work with other executives to do that. I'm always glad to talk about that, but there's a good portion of it is really you can find on the web, or just get the book. I think it's $15 on Amazon. It'll give you all of the details. So for example, like my top, as a kind of an engineering brain, my top saboteur is the hyper rational. I like everything it's quantitative. So that's usually where I land. And before I had taken the program and have been working on getting my saboteurs quieted, that mine was right up around an 8 out of 10. So it was pretty strong. And then using all the techniques, mindfulness, meditation, breathing, there's lots and lots of different things that you can do. Pausing, reflecting, turning on your sage brain elements, whether it's empathizing or exploring, innovating, any of those. By doing that, the last time I'd taken the assessment, which was several years after I took the original one, my numbers were down to like 5 and 6, right? So
Hmm.
once again, you're not going to the goal's not to get rid of them. It's just to keep them quiet so that they're not taking over they're not hijacking your brain.
And I think a lot of that's awareness. I mean, I guess that's oversimplifying it, but I've noticed in the show a lot of times it's just being aware of the thing, the positive, the weakness, whatever it is. A lot of times it's just knowing. At a previous episode, we were just talking about identifying calories that you eat or things that go out of your money and budget. Just being aware of the money that's leaving
Yeah.
sometimes is enough to, oh, I'm sure we all eat out too much and there's too much Starbucks in the bank account and things like that. And I think we know it's there, but when you're actually like face to face, I think that's a good reminder. Like, we're built how we're built, so that's fine. But just being aware of it, like you said, and from the 8 down to the 6, I mean, not gone, but you're just aware of how it works and how you can work that in to kind of work towards your benefit. Well, that's
Yeah,
good.
that's a great summary, and Shirzad talks a lot about that in the book, about really being aware, and that's probably the foundational piece is we're trying to raise your awareness of the things that you do well, the things that hold you back, and also once you're aware of them, you have to have the tools to be able to to keep them at bay or energize them. And I think that's one of the things, when Daniel Goleman, I did a lot of emotional intelligence stuff when I was doing my doctoral research. That's one of the things that Goleman did back in the 90s is he came up with a model, and it was very descriptive of how you can improve it or kind of move forward. But what Shirzad has done is he's moved from a descriptive model to a prescriptive model. And it's not like one way you have to do it. It's here's options, use the option that works best for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Gazzara, let's transition into your second pillar, which is flow. So, how do you define flow in the context of leadership and productivity?
Yeah. So I'm not going to define it myself. I'm going to use, if anyone has read the book or they haven't read the book, this is of my top 5 books of all time to read. This is probably number 1. And the concept of flow was developed by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I'm not going to try to spell that to the group. And what Dr. Csikszentmihalyi did, and he was the department chair at the University of Chicago, Department of Psychology, so a very prestigious position. And what he recognized through his research, where he came up with this concept of flow, was that we all have this zone that we get into where you have the right balance of challenge and skill. When your skill meets the challenge, you get into what he calls the flow zone. And back in the 90s, that was retermed as being in the zone. So a lot of people know, like, oh, I'm in the zone. Talk about Olympic
Hmm.
athletes, we're in the Olympics at the moment. It's like being in the zone. The best Olympic athletes are in flow, and that's where the level of challenge and the level of skill completely matches it. You can imagine, if you want to use like a skiing scenario, if you put a new skier on black diamonds, that's going to put that the level of challenge and the level of skill are not going to be matched in there. That's going to push them into what they call anxiety, or he calls anxiety. And of course, if you put the Olympic skier on the bunny slope, right, where the skill is extreme and the challenge is low, that's going to put them in an area of boredom. And the key is to find out where's that meeting point where the challenge and skill, so that you can just push yourself just a little bit outside of the flow zone, so that you're continually learning, right, and growing. And Olympic athletes operate at, tens and tens. If you use a 10-point scale, 10 on challenge and 10 on skill, that's really where they operate. It's usually getting to like that 8 and 8 point. It takes about 20% of the time, and then there's that extra 20%, just to get that level of perfection where you're, the most amazing at what you do in the world. That's the other 80% of the work. And most people, particularly if you look at companies or talk about this in a business perspective, most companies are really happy to get people to the 80%, and they can certainly, there's some that are going to excel up into the 10 out of 10 where they get to that 100%. But if you can get people to stay in the flow, where you can continually look at the work that they do and balance that on a continual basis, one, you get some things that are amazing. Flow doesn't guarantee performance. Generally, people that are in flow will be performing better, but it is much more from the perspective of they're so engaged in the work. But one of the things that does happen in flow is creativity just explodes. That's where you get the most creative. And I would say if everybody's experienced flow, like if you're working on something and you look up at the clock and it's 12 o'clock and you swear it's 9 o'clock, oh, the clock must be broken. That can't be right. Where you've lost these 3 hours, that's flow. And what you really want to do, the best managers and leaders, and this is what we teach, and this is how I coach the leaders that I work with, is really find out where the people are on the flow diagram. Are they in boredom and anxiety? Are they in flow? And get them closer. The more you can do to give them projects and activities that get them closer to flow, the better off that you're going to be with regard to engagement, and you're going to get lots and lots of that creativity that you're looking for. So that's
I think that's perfect too. Watching the Winter Olympics, I love the Olympics. Yeah, my dad always loved him. I ended up losing my dad. But one thing that, he always loved was like people being able to come together and challenge each other and, have a little bit of peace. There's some things that happen from time to time, but for the most part, we're sportsmanlike and whatnot. But yeah, I think that's so cool watching this week that you touched on the skill and challenge. It's interesting. I was watching, I forget the exact event. I think it was big air for ski, or maybe it was half pipe for snowboarding. But it's so interesting where somebody goes down and puts down a really great run, and then after that other people are able to do things like multiple times. The commentators mentioned they've never done that in competition before, but they saw someone else do it. The challenge was there, they had the skill, like you're saying, so challenge match skill, and they were able to perform things they hadn't done all year, or maybe there was a couple times they've never done, but they saw someone else say, hey, this is it, I gotta step myself up and step that game up. So it's a perfect analogy, being able to connect the skill and challenge, some things you never thought were possible.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I would say to the listeners, Nate, is don't wait for your boss to do this. You can do this yourself, right? Figure out what's motivating, what's demotivating for you. You can go to our site, or I'll give you a contact if you want to talk about this. I'm always overly excited to be able to talk about people, because I've helped so many people be able to find their flow, how to get into the flow. And the other thing is once you're there and you experience it, you just don't want to do anything else. And the thing is, doesn't cost anything. It's a little bit of time. It's once again, we go back to the concept of awareness. It's being aware. It's being aware and being able to influence change. And we've worked with organizations, that senior executive levels of multi-billion-dollar companies, where we've gotten them to understand this, all the way down to we work with a group of people that worked in a nursing home, in the kitchen in a nursing home, and you don't have to have a PhD in something, you don't even have to have a high school degree. The concept is so simple that everybody gets it. And, once you can work with the different groups and get them to understand, this can be applied for anyone, whether you're a parent, whether you're a manager, whether you're executive, whether you're in the kitchen, flipping hamburgers for a nursing home. It's all the same.
So I thought I saw a staggering statistic that said like 60% of people don't enjoy their job. So if someone doesn't even like their job, can they still accomplish flow?
Absolutely. Yep. What we found is that when we did this with a large organization in Washington, D.C. several years ago, that did a lot of healthcare work. Actually, they were doing analysis, and their turnover rate was significantly higher. And it would take like 18 months to get these people trained, and people were leaving at 3 to 6 months. So they could never get people trained, and the work was going up, and people were unhappy, and it was just a terrible environment. And what we found was as long as you can make people understand that kind of they're empowered and they have the ability to influence what they do and have that conversation with their manager, that they can change it, right? That anybody can get into it. Now, if you're a line worker, feeding a machine, to make, plastic bottles or something, and that's your job. What we found was you probably have a little bit less influence of being able to get into flow. But what we did find is that most of those jobs can be automated, or you can put a system in place that can help reduce some of that monotonous routine kind of work. And if you can do that, where you're coming up with new ideas, maybe like, for example, we do work a lot with manufacturing, is get them to do some batching, right? So rather than walking over, picking up the elements, bringing it in one by one, you create an automated system where 10 of the items come over automatically on their own to fill you out, right? So that's something that reduces some of the monotony, and you can get the people involved to get that creative piece turned on, because they're working the line of, like, you tell me, kind of, what do you see? What do you see? How could we do something different, right? So which will kind of lead into I think, our third pillar, which is around tasks. So we could talk about that as well.
Yeah, transition. So the final one is balancing tasks for maximum engagement. So why do so many people that are capable feel disengaged even when they're actually busy?
Yeah, and this is where all my doctoral work went. So when I did my dissertation, I wanted to look at the relationship of task balance. And there are three types of tasks that we do. This was done by some research by a gentleman named William Daniels. And what Bill found out was that there's three types of tasks that everyone does. Pretty much you can put them into categories. And there's routine tasks, there's troubleshooting or problem-solving tasks, and there's project tasks. And if you look at it, each one of us has a unique balance of those. There's 496 different mixtures of those tasks. And when I was managing at a team of about 20 people at Intel, I was managing, and I noticed something. This was right before I went into a doctoral program. One of the things I noticed was they're all master's level students, new hires right out of college, a similar level of experience, similar behaviors. I'd walk into the office with the first employee, and they'd say, "Boy, Kevin, I really love doing A, but or I hate or love doing A and B, but I hate doing C." Okay, that's interesting. And same exact kind of work. This was when I was working in HR. Person B would say, "I love doing B, but I hate A and C." And the third person would say, "I love doing C, but I hate A and B." And I thought, what the heck is going on here? Why is that? Similar backgrounds, same school, whatever, similar personality styles. So my hypothesis was that each one of us has a different balance of task types that we like to do. And we have one of those 496 different balances. And if you can put someone in a job where they're getting their ideal balance of routine troubleshooting project work on a regular basis, you could raise their level. What I proved is you can raise their level of job satisfaction, of motivation, engagement, and empowerment, where they really feel much more empowered. I had hoped that it would actually create flow. So when I did my dissertation, I invited Dr. Chick-Sing Mihai to be on my committee to help me develop an assessment tool for this. And I was very fortunate that he helped me develop an assessment tool, which we ultimately called the task quotient assessment, which, for those that last to the end of this long talk I'm giving podcast, I'll give you a link, and they can take that assessment. We normally charge for it, but I've got a link, Nate, for you specifically for them. So once you figure out your ideal task, and I'll give you a mixture, and I'll give you mine. Mine is, I like about 50% project work. I like about 30% troubleshooting work, and about 20% routine kind of work. So I try to structure my days And I have a different cadence. That's the other thing we work on is your cadence. Everybody has a different cadence. I can do project work for about 2 hours, troubleshooting an hour to hour and a half, and routine work right about 30 to 45 minutes. So I structure my days in the different work blocks. Because what I used to do, I don't know about you, but I know when I went to school, is I would say, okay, Friday, I'm locking myself in the dorm room. I'm going to write that paper. I'm going to sit down and nothing's going to distract me. Sure enough, like 2 hours later, I'm up. I'm going to get something to drink or make a phone call or go talk to someone or whatever. And the reason is because when you're doing that one type of task, that our brain needs a different level of feedback that shows accomplishment. And routine work, you can get lots of feedback quickly. It's very low intensity, but it's a high frequency. Troubleshooting is about medium. And then project work, once you get that paper done or that book written or that whatever you're working on, you have a very, very high intensity level of feedback, but it's just one time. Kind of an understanding that if you can really place yourself in an environment where you're able to do the structure. It's the same amount of work for the week or the day. The difference is it's just chunking it up in ways. And too often what happens is people try to do, they try to get a variety of they get a variety of the types of things they're working on, but not the task types that they're working on. So they might go from problem solving. At the end of the day, they're exhausted and they really don't feel like they want to do that again. And what we found was you need to have a little bit of routine. Well, depending on what your assessment says, is you need some of each of the three. It's very rare that anybody has only two of that, where somebody has a zero tolerance for one of them. It's usually you have some small tolerance, but it's very rare to see. And we've never seen anyone, we've done more than 10,000 of the assessments. We've never seen anyone that has just a project or just a routine or just a troubleshooting. But we have had like a handful of people out of the 10,000 that, and my business partner, he only has tolerance for troubleshooting and project work. You give him anything routine, he can do it, completely de-energizing for him. So we don't give him a lot of routine kind of work.
That's interesting. That's pretty mind-blowing. I never knew that it was broken out like that, because I've noticed, like, as you were talking, when I get in, I try to do my email and work on, I guess, project-related things, the stuff that's in my to-do list when I got the most energy, and then I transition into trying to solve problems, and that's kind of back to the notebook. But I end every day in some of the admin functions I have to do, like updating records of training and different stuff for my team, and that's all like routine. And so at the end, I'm usually more tired. I don't have as much, but I don't mind doing the routine at the end because I'm just kind of want to wrap the day up. I don't feel as much. And so it's interesting. Like, as you were explaining it, I think I fall into those different buckets and I'm like, yeah, I want to close this day out by just clicking and I don't really have to think about much. I've done the thinking, I've done the troubleshooting, and now I'm going to close out this day, feel good, kind of getting some wins, I guess, but it's like completely monotonous. That's interesting. Huh?
Yes. Yeah. So what you're experiencing is that you've probably had, like I said, the difference is the degree of feedback that you got, right? You're going to the routine work, you're getting a high frequency of feedback, low intensity, right? Like, oh, I got rid of those 10 emails. Bam, delete. Oh, I answered that question. Can we do this for this next project? Yes, go see this person. Also routine, right? So you get your inbox to go from 30 to 0. That feels pretty good. You get high frequency, but there's nothing of incredible substance there. If you're working on that project and you make that breakthrough, you get that first chapter done of the book and you get it approved. Okay, you only got one thing done in the same amount of time. You got 30 things done here, but the difference is the intensity is significantly different. And once you know what your brain needs, structuring your day so you get that throughout the day is important. And the last thing I'll mention about it is people ask me, well, how do I know when I need to change? And it's when your brain starts processing other stuff than when you're in the moment of where you are. Like you're working on that book chapter Hey, and if you're in there for 2 or 3 or 4 hours or whatever, and you are in the zone and you're flow, do not stop that, right? But at some point in time, you're gonna start thinking about, oh, I need to go pick up the kids at school, or I need to do that email, or that invoice is still outstanding. That just says, time out. I need to switch task types. And if you're working on a project, go work on troubleshooting or routine, and vice versa. And if you can do that on a regular basis, the end of the day, you will feel not only really fulfilled, but you'll also be energized and want to come back and do the same system again.
That's powerful. Yeah, I'm gonna have to come back and listen through all that again.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, it was awesome. You had three wonderful pillars today. I always like to try to bring it all together at the end. So, how do positive intelligence, flow, and intentional task balance work together to help someone perform at a high level without burning out?
So I'd say understand your emotional or positive intelligence is really the foundational piece. And once you can get your brain to slow down or calm the saboteurs and accelerate the the sage portion of your brain, that allows you to create a structure called the task quotient structure, the balance. And once you get that balance, now you've created the structure to be able to get that flow channel happening on a regular basis. And once you've kind of you raise that awareness, not only you raise your awareness of your emotional intelligence, you've raised your awareness of what's motivating and demotivating, and you know what task types. So when you're looking at, hey, I want to start a new project or whatever, if you have a need for 50% project work and you're already at 70, it's probably not a good idea to add more project work, so forth. It may feel right at the moment, but it's always going to make you feel drained at the end. And Nate, if anybody who's listened this far wants to understand that balance of task relationship, they can go to magnaleader.co, not com, MAGNA leader.co / and in all caps, GIFT, gift. If they do that, anyone listening can take that, including yourself, can take your task quotient assessment, and it'll tell you what your ideal balance is so that you can help structure your day, and, we can make the world a little bit better.
Yeah, that's important information. When you have more information, like we talked about, being aware is just so powerful. When you know what to do, you can actually get after it, but you have to know. So I'm glad you've developed some tools. Well, this has been insightful and practical. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Before we wrap up, where can listeners connect a little bit more about you? You mentioned the website. Is there any other ways to follow you?
Yeah, so if anyone wants to have a chat about any of the topics, all of these, and hopefully you can tell I have a passion for all of these, they can reach me at kevin@magnaleadership.com, MAGNA leadership.com, all one word. And I'd be delighted to talk to you. The promise I have to any of the listeners is I won't give you, there's no sales pitch. You're not going to get a sales pitch of like, oh, you need to hire me, or I'm going to, no, no, no. If I can help you, and I can help you be a better leader and help your team, I'm delighted to do that. I mean, a lot of people ultimately have said, hey, I'd like to work with you longer term. Great. But you're not going to get a pitch from me. I really do want to be helpful.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for taking time. I feel like time is the most precious commodity. Awesome. You're out here trying to help others. To everyone listening, thank you for investing in your growth. If this helped you, please pass it along to someone else. I love you all. See ya.